So good morning and welcome to episode 6, which concludes the end of series 1, actually, of our Fireside Chat. So thank you for everyone that's joined us on these sessions so far. It's been a fun 6 months, and thank you, obviously, more importantly, to our customer advisory board panel for joining us on this as well. So we're not going to talk about football or anything like that today. It's a shame. We could have probably spent the entire session talking about the game. We won't do that. Instead, we're talking about something else that's coming home, which is Windows 11. So Windows 11 has been officially announced. It will be hitting PCs, home, education, commercial, over the next 12 months, fair to say. We know Windows 10 is still supported, of course, until 2025. I imagine there'll be extended support and all the other things that typically happen. But we thought it was worthwhile just spending a little bit of time talking about Windows 11, really. And I see from the number of registrations for this session that it's clearly a topic that you're all interested in. I think it's the highest number of registrations we've had for a while for a live show. So I'm just going to walk through a couple of the announcements for anyone that missed them. Or is thinking, what, Windows 11? When did that happen? I've just been thinking about the football. So just going to walk you through some of those things, and then really we're going to have a chat with the panel and encourage all of you to give us some questions and feedback around what Windows 11 means for you, for your organisation, things you might need to start thinking about. Hopefully, qualm some of the misconceptions that are certainly out there around what Windows 11 is and isn't. So we're currently on the second release, if you like, the second beta build of Windows 11. So it was announced 2 weeks ago on the 24th of June. A week before that, a build slipped into the channel. Whether that was on purpose or not is still not known. But now, if you're enrolled in the Windows Insider program, either personally or through your workplace, then you can actually start testing and playing around with Windows 11. It's fair to say, there's still 5 months worth of development, right? So what you see today is certainly not what the end product will be. There will be changes. There will be lots of feedback from the user community and from the technical channel around things they like and don't like. So do expect it to change. Do expect there to be new features. For those of you that saw the launch or the announcement, I should say, there were some features that were shown that still aren't showing up in the insider builds that they will roll out over time. One of the things I've heard lots of people say is, it's like another Vista. It's a big glossy skin over a bloated operating system that's grown over the last 5 years or so. And I think I'd probably challenge that to start with and say, if you've not looked at Windows 11 in any detail at all, it is far more than that. It's fair to say Windows 11 is, of course, built on Windows 10. It is the next evolution of Windows. Therefore, it is familiar. It's not going to, you're not going to look at it and go, oh my God, where is everything? But they have introduced some quite significant changes. Microsoft will tell you it's about being more productive. So it's a simplified, cleaner UI. A lot of people compare it to the Mac experience. I personally don't think it looks anything like a Mac, but it's got glass panels and those kind of things. They're trying to make it much more collaborative. So they tried this with Windows 10 on the consumer world by embedding Skype into the product. At the time when everybody started using Zoom, so that was probably not a great thing. But you'll see certainly on the commercial enterprise versions, then Teams is going to be natively integrated into Windows. It's unknown at the moment how much of that can be removed, how much of that can be replaced with your own choice of collaboration app. One of the things that they have promised is consistency with applications. So the remit is, if your application works on Windows 10, as it works properly on Windows 10, it will work on Windows 11. And that I guess that's to be seen. Certainly, my experience of running Windows 11 as I have the last couple of weeks is everything just runs fine. I've had a couple of glitches as you'd expect on an early build, and the final thing is around security. So this is really what's driving a lot of the other frustration that I'm reading and seeing in the channel, which is around the hardware requirements that are going to be there for Windows 11. And we'll touch on a little bit of that later on. So that's kind of what Microsoft are trying to do. That they claim that this is the world that we entered in 2020 before the pandemic started is a very different world as we come out of this pandemic. Certainly with people's working attitude, the types of devices that they're using. If you look at some of the IDC shipment information about devices, that the number of desktops being purchased is reduced by, I forget what the number is now. It was huge, 3 digits. Whereas the growth in mobile devices and tablets and touchscreens and stuff is through the roof, right? And in fact, we've had the biggest year of PC shipments and by that laptop shipments in more than a decade. So it's certainly fueling a change of work style. So yeah, we'll go into some of these things in a bit more detail. But before we do that, I really just wanted to reach out to the panel now and just ask a couple of experience questions from you. So can you all raise your hand if any of you are currently running Windows 11 on any of your devices? A couple of you. I could have guessed. Aidan, I'm surprised you weren't on that list, actually. James, first impressions?
I found it a really smooth journey to transition, if I'm honest. I'm guessing we'll get into challenges and thoughts that are around it. I think it's important to keep in mind that it's a preview release still. There's a lot of work still to be done on it. Some of the things that bother me in terms of app switching in the live environment can be a bit laggy and a bit problem. The odd app crash here or there and some driver incompatibility and stuff. But I've seen glimpses of some early features that I think will be super useful.
Dave? Oh, you're on mute, Dave. I'm hoping Windows 11 fixes that problem for you as well.
I knew I'd do that if I pushed that button. My apologies. Very much the same. I've tried it both in virtual environments and on a Surface Laptop 4. Very smooth, very seamless. The Surface Laptop 4, I run an upgrade from Windows 10. It was absolutely seamless, and it's been working really well. There are a few UI glitches, but nothing shocking and nothing we shouldn't expect at this early stage. And yeah, very, very impressed at an early build.
Yeah, I think it's probably the first early build I've ever used that is actually usable. I mean, you don't expect, and I think people say, "Oh, it's in development." Yeah, this is alpha stage, right? This isn't even in the beta channels yet. This is as rough as it pretty much as it gets, unless you're in the Microsoft canary rings. And yeah, the same. I'm really impressed. In fact, I've been more impressed. So I migrated my so I use a Surface Book 2 as my main machine, and I took the plunge. Don't tell IT. I took the plunge and migrated that myself to Windows 11. And I've also got a Surface Go, little baby Surface, which is a lot lower specification. I used to use it a lot when I was traveling because it's got an LTE 4G SIM in it and stuff. And actually, I found the performance on that stepped up a notch. I was actually really impressed with the performance on those lower end devices. And if you read some of the technical stats around Windows 11 and read some of the benchmark tests that have been done by Windows Central and on Microsoft and some of those sites, that tends to be the theme. Lower end devices actually seem to run Windows 11 faster than they run the latest build, which would be 21H1 of Windows 11. Which I guess then asks a question, doesn't it? So why have Microsoft increased, in some cases quite significantly, the hardware requirements to run Windows 11? I think most of it they're saying you need to be running an 8th gen Intel chipset. There's a few, I think, on the 7th gen that will run, but generally speaking, it's the 8th gen. So what's your impressions of that? What's your thoughts around the change of hardware requirements? Who wants to pick that one up? Aidan?
I think probably, I suppose we're probably a bit behind, if I'm honest, everyone else's journey at the moment. I think we are finishing, well, we're starting our second ever deployment of Windows 10. To be honest, it's we've got that out to about 20% of the organisation already, and we're hitting the next major 60% this month. So we went through the long hard yards of getting everything packaged into a maintained state from 7 to 10 the first time we deployed, and we got a peculiar complexity because we got 20% of our organisation works with 7 different fleets of trains, and they've got about 140 applications, some of which still use esoteric things like PCMCA cards to get data on and off train systems. So trying to get the 140 applications tested with engineers in the depots, mainly in the middle of the night when trains are in for sort of maintenance and service, mean that we'll never be on the initial release when it comes out. I think at some point, once we've done it a couple of times, we'll have a look and sort of see, do we go to a faster cadence and do everyone apart from fleet a lot sooner, apart from fleet in the control rooms, I should say. But I think from my perspective, if I look at the historic age of the estate, I'm immediately kind of worried, mainly more so around my desktop estate, because it tends to be a bit older than the laptop estate we run, as to kind of whether we're going to have to do some profiling to sort of see what kit we need to replace before we actually be able to deploy it. Ironically, the TPM chip is probably going to be less of an issue than the processor, because the TPM chip, if you got a 1.2, you can generally usually firmware upgrade it to a 2. But we're definitely going to have to have a look at some of the older sort of laptops, and definitely a large percentage of the desktop fleet will be suspect, shall we say, as to whether we'll actually be able to upgrade and deploy it. But to be honest, probably less of an issue. I mean, we're pushing 20H2 now. We'll be looking at 21H2 next, and then I think it'll be the interesting decision will be about a year after 21H2. Do we go for Windows 11 at that point, really? And hopefully by then I should have hopefully replaced some of the oldest kit, whether through failure or replacement refresh programs. So I'm hoping it won't be much of an issue when we get to it, but we'd never be the first day out the gates at all. It's we're always probably at least a year behind, just for stability, to be honest, and that's more for our industry with operating 24/7 than anything else. Yeah, interested. I mean, it does look interesting. I think, is it a bit more consumer aimed with the sort of graphical refreshes and things like that? It's got some security updates in there as well, so I think there's a bit for everyone in there, really.
And yeah, thanks. I kind of agree. And I guess, Kevin, I had a sort of question for you, if you don't mind. Is you look after a lot of users, right? You work for East Riding of Yorkshire Council. Do people care? Do you care about Windows 11? Is it a big thing? Is it an annoyance? Is it something that you think is going to change people's world? Is it gonna, when you look at these kind of things like an operating system refresh, outside of it's going end of life, right? And we know Windows 10 will be supported till at least 2025. So why are we having a conversation about Windows 11 today? What's your kind of immediate thought?
So the challenge I've got 234 applications with 6,000 users plus, and even though it's already been stated that anything that runs on 10 will run in 11, that's fine. But will our suppliers support it on that platform? So that's always one of the bigger challenges. It might work, but if I log a service test call to a supplier, will they say we don't support that platform currently? And it's interesting what you said regarding the OS itself, because I'll be honest with you, I don't think most people care. Which sounds a bit harsh, but they open their laptop, they log into the network, they double click an icon to take them into their social services system. They don't look at the actual OS. The thing which I do think will be of great benefit, I've got to be honest with you, is like many organisations, we've moved to Teams. and I'm really interested in, I think it's been badged as Teams 2.0, isn't it?
Yes.
It's what the integration with the desktop is in Teams. I think that could be a huge benefit in the future, but I don't know what that looks like yet, so I can't really comment on it. But I think that's going to be the area which is sort of more exciting, because it actually makes it easier, hopefully, to actually get to messages and and actually get to content through the operating system. But if you ask a social worker, when we move from Windows 7 to Windows 10, they still use the same application. So our shift last time, I'll be honest with you, would probably still be on 7 if it was supported.
And I think that was actually the challenge that Microsoft had, right, for years. And I still walk into, I was in a GP clinic actually a couple of weeks back with my son, and it was all Windows 7, everywhere. And obviously working in this space, you can't look at stuff and go, oh, Windows 7. We've got a handful of clients that we work with that are paying, extortionate amounts of money. I'm sure there's probably a couple of you on this call. If you are, please drop a note in the comments. But I'm interested to know, how many of you out there are still running Windows 7 and paying for extended support. It's an interesting one. If so, why? And I think one of the questions that we get asked all the time, or I've certainly been asked around is I thought Windows 10 was going to be the last version of Windows, right? And there was this, and I had to do a bit of digging around this, right? Because I remember this as well. I remember Windows 10 being announced, and it was like it's going to be Windows as a service, and there was a lot of, they'll probably drop the 10 eventually. It will just be Windows, right? It'll just be Windows. We won't have a version number, because once everyone's on Windows 10, we won't need to think about XP and 7 and kind of what's before that. But when you dig into it, actually, it was a bit of a passing comment. I actually watched the launch or the announcement of Windows 10, and it was a bit of a passing comment rather than a definitive promise. But it's an interesting one as to why they've done it. I think it is very much about PR, and marketing. If you look at the way that Apple market their products and their releases, Microsoft have certainly taken a leap from some of the big innovators in, certainly from the consumer space, right? And I think Microsoft have learned the hard way. How many times will they learn, I guess, is the question, actually. But there have been so many things that Microsoft have done in their history of product innovation that have been phenomenal, from a technology perspective, from a UI perspective, from a capability perspective, that just haven't hit the market, that the consumer hasn't got behind. You've almost had inferior products or Me Too products released by other vendors that are just really great at marketing their products and doing, great sizzle videos. And I think something we've, certainly seen in the last 3-4 years is how much effort Microsoft have put into driving demand for their product set. And I think if you look at, Surface and almost anything now that Microsoft advertise and promote, it's very much about trying to win the hearts and the minds of the end user. Whereas I think actually a lot of what Windows 11 offers is, a lot of this is still quite sketchy still because it's kind of new, but really I think is designed to accelerate the way that devices are managed, procured, and the life cycle of those devices. So there's a lot of investment going into, and there has been a lot of investment into the modern management approaches for devices. It pains me, I don't know how many of you still do this, actually be interesting on the panel how many of you do this, that still actually image devices. Take a device that you buy in bulk and wipe it and start again with an image. I work with lots of customers that, can I have a show of hands? Do any of you still image devices against just slipstream builds? Yeah, okay. So wow. So more of you than less. And again, just asking the audience, are you listening? It'd be interesting to just to know how many of you still image devices. And why is that? Can I ask the question why that is?
I think that's, times are changing. I don't know about the others, but in my context, an image would be kind of the old fat image you'd have sort of done 10 or 15 years ago, where you blow it on with all the applications on. We're in a very different stage to that now. We sort of thin provision the OS and then layer the applications on top, separately packaged using SCCM. Our major reason for doing it was when we started our Windows 10 deployment. Autopilot was a bit too new, and to be honest, most of the sort of 200 plus sites I was going to deploy kit to, the pipes were very, very small, and had to sort of maintain key services for sort of passengers and customers in those sites. So we took the decision, we go with SCCM, pre-image them and ship them out fully built. And interestingly, we've upgraded about 85% of the pipes since then. So this time round, we're now pushing the OS update out over the wire. So admittedly, a lot of people are at home, but we fundamentally went with that decision because it was the restrictions of our network infrastructure, to be honest, and our speeds. I think we're going to go through at least this round again with SCCM for 20H2, and then we'll see after that. I think we are in a position where we've got a lot more stuff standardized and consolidated from multiple separate domains. So next time round, we'll probably look at sort of see what we've transitioned across to autopilot, and can we stop actually sort of pushing a full layered image down first. But I don't know.
Interesting. Rowland, I know you've got less users, but I know you've adopted a fully automated, unattended approach to deployment, haven't you, already with Windows 10?
Yeah. When we moved from desktop machines to Surface Pros, we moved to autopilot at that point. Had some help from some of your guys, Rob, to set that up initially, and I have to say it's worked pretty well since. We've had to tweak it a few times and start to build up some of our knowledge to be able to do that, but we have found that it's very effective. We had reasonable sized pipes to our sites though, and this was all pre-COVID as well, so we were pretty comfortable with doing that. Now, that said, when it comes to Windows 11, I think that we may well take a very risk-averse kind of approach, and actually we're due for a hardware refresh next year, and we may well tie the two things together and say that when we issue people new devices, we'll issue new devices with Windows 11 on them, and once we've worked our way through our stock, it'll cover probably about 85% of the machines we have will be due for replacement at some point in 22. And so then the last 15% or so after that, we'll just pick up individually and deal with those as upgrades. But I don't see any pressure for us to start to do it. It's probably the first thing. I mean, in much the same way that Kevin was saying, our users turn it on, go into a web browser, open Outlook, and then everything else happens in the web browser or Outlook. They really don't care much. And especially now that we've got the back end of things, storing everything on OneDrive and so forth, they're not that fussed about the actual devices or the underlying operating system. So I think it is going to be worth doing the upgrades. I think there's going to be things like security improvements that start to come across. I mean, I think one of the big reasons probably for Microsoft packaging it as a separate product and saying this is Windows 11 is to make it easier to draw a baseline under those new hardware requirements, which include things like the TPM2, so that they can then say Windows 11 is a higher level of security than Windows 10 ever was. It's much harder to make that as a publicity thing than Windows 10 21H2. That's a much harder sell from a publicity perspective. Whereas saying to people it's Windows 11, therefore by definition the hardware is trusted, is probably quite a good selling point for them.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think that's certainly a lot of the technical sessions that we've been involved in around the why. It is all around that. I think the under the hood stuff is what people generally don't see and don't think about, and as a user, you just kind of expect what you're using to be safe and secure, and all of those things. And I think it is. I think Microsoft have been doing, as they kind of always have done. I think if you go back to the very early days of Windows 10, and certainly things like Windows Hello, and even like ink support and those things, and Microsoft built a lot of that around Surface. Right, part of the reason that they wanted to build their own hardware back in the day was really just to set out the just to almost set this is how we expect good to look like. This is what good looks like. This is what you can do. So a lot of the technology that we now see in every device that we buy from any vendor has got technology that was first to Surface, right? Windows Hello was first to Surface, Ink and Pen first to Surface, and that's phenomenal. But I think you're right. The security baseline has been something that Microsoft have been wanting to do and talking about. You know, their kind of strap line of secure from chip to cloud, as they call it. They've been doing with Surface for the last 3 or 4 years. So that's why generally you can take a 3-year-old Surface Book, which I'm using now, and it is fully compliant. Yet there are devices out there that are brand new, running the latest Intel processors, for example, but they're not designed to that same security level because they're cheaper components. They've and it's never been a requirement. And so I think you're right. I think that is a key thing. The other thing I look at when I think about the hardware is I'm a bit like, whatever, really, because it's for most people it's a year away, right? Realistically, if it hits market in January, which is the current target date, then I think that's key. Most organizations won't take it outside of pilot programs and those things until probably at least the first main update, right? Which, if you believe what you read, then the main updates are going to be annual now, but there will be obviously a whole bunch of quality updates that will get issued once the devices roll out. I expect organizations running Surface to probably take it sooner, just because it's been tested on Surface for a lot longer than the rest of the channels got the product sets. And also, if organizations are going through refreshes, then if you're refreshing equipment now, then we'll just make sure you're buying devices that are going to be compliant with Windows 11 if you're going to start doing that. And if you're not, then so be it. You've got 5 years to get off the platform. Microsoft say there's 1.5 billion devices out there now running Windows 10. I think that the prediction is that there'll be 2 billion devices running Windows 11 by 2025. Who knows? But I think for many, the some of the UI aspects, and I was going to touch on those a little bit now, are actually quite cool. And I think whilst I agree for many people, it's just an interface to click start, and whether that start button is on the left or in the center, as it is by default now on Windows 10, it's about launching apps. There are some quite cool new UI changes that I just wanted to get your view on, really. So for those that are using it and those that have read the glosses, have you got any standout things that you like, or things that you hate and you wish it was the other way? James?
So one of the things that's right at the top of my list that I've always used as soon as it came in was simply just snapping, being able to split your screen in half. One of the great things now is when you hover over the full screen icon, you get 6 different options for how you want to break those windows down. And then it prompts you as to how you want to fill the screen in those quadrants. For someone like, well, I guess most of us, we're all multitasking across a number of different apps. Super, super useful, tiny little UI tweaks there that I really like.
Yeah, and there are things you could always do, of course, with Power Toys and some of these sort of third-party things. It's not, weirdly though, it's funny actually. Kevin, you were talking about Teams earlier. Teams doesn't. I don't know if you've tried it. You can't snap Teams as the primary. You can do it secondary, but you can't summon the snap assist on Teams, which I found quite strange. I think for me, the other one I love on that is also the fact that you can group them. So once you've put those apps into your four, then they do appear like that at the bottom of the taskbar. So actually you can restore those 4 apps as well in the same place, which is really nice. One of the things I'm hoping they do is bring that to virtual desktop as well, because it would be quite nice to be able to have virtual desktops restoring with different applications as well. Who else has got some favourites? Dave?
I think for me, that multi-screen was top of my list as well. The multi-app, the way the apps work. I think the bit, and I still think it's got a bit more development to do, is docking and undocking. Is something that we all do, adding additional secondary screens and things like that. I think any improvements we can get in that functionality is welcomed, really. I think we've all suffered for many years with Windows 10 where you dock with certain screens. I've got different docks, or one I've got in the office, and then the layouts go and everything all moves all over the place. So I'm really looking forward to the improvements in that.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I run 2 screens, and I found it probably about 80% effective. Occasionally, it kind of has a little bit of a wobble with things. I get a few weird things sometimes where the resolution is wrong when it restores back. I've got a couple of issues around that, but again, any of you using Windows 11 in preview mode, do use the feedback hub. It's really, really important to ensure that you're feeding this stuff back, and it's the reason that it exists, right? It's the reason that the Windows Insider program is there, is to ensure that when these devices, when this OS does release, it's hopefully had hundreds of thousands of consumers and IT professionals playing around with this as well. Anyone else got any standouts so far? No? Rowland, you're on mute if you were talking. I wasn't sure if you were talking.
No, nothing for me yet.
I'll tell you one that I stumbled across yesterday by mistake, actually. I don't know what I was trying to do, but is there's a new dictation tool. So Windows has always had dictation, but there's a new dictation tool, which actually I found a couple of videos on where they're really trying to promote it. So it's like a Windows key and H. And from what they've said, they're using a whole new, it's not just the app, there's a whole new Azure service behind it that powers it. So I was actually watching, I was on it's the Microsoft Inspire conference this week, which is the big global partner event, which is normally in Vegas, but obviously is now live from your living room. I had one of the sessions on one of my other screens, and I used the dictation and transcribed the entire 45-minute presentation. And it was so accurate. I've used live dictation within Teams before, and it's okay. This was pretty much word for word. So if you've not played around with the dictation tool, and it works on any app, you can have it so that it replaces the input bar. Obviously, it's a big accessibility play, which is another big thing for Microsoft, of course, in Windows 11. But if you've not tried it, I was really quite impressed. Not quite sure what I'd use it for. I generally handwrite notes and those kind of things, but it is really, really, really accurate. So definitely recommend that one. What about widgets? Have you seen the widget bar that they've kind of brought back? It feels a bit like the late Vista and early Windows 7. But have you had a play around with the widgets? Any thoughts on that?
I have. I've got to confess, I'm not a big widget person. I think it can be quite faddy, but there might be other people who feel completely differently. I know where I want to go for my content. I'm quite happy with how I do that. And I've already got feeds that put it in my inbox and curate it for me. Having to customize another widget, it'll probably be my most underused element of the build, to be fair. Happy to be challenged by others who find it super useful.
I feel exactly the same. For me, it's just it's going to sit as something I don't use, and I'll probably turn off. I have turned it on. I have tried it. I'm a big Microsoft To Do user, so made sure that widget was in there. But I kind of think, well, I've got To Do open anyway. It's just hidden behind the scenes on that task view or that widget view. So it's not one I'm going to use. But likewise, other people may have more of a use for it.
Yeah, it's a sort of thing I expected to see. Because obviously, Windows 8 introduced live tiles, which were criticised, obviously, quite heavily. Worked very well on mobile for any of you that were foolish enough or lucky enough, depending on what side of the fence you sit, of using Windows Mobile. It was a really innovative thing at the time. To have that. I think Apple are just starting to bring out that kind of live widget type effect into their OS, and I think it is very much a mobile play. I use a Samsung phone, and that's got live things on it, which is quite useful for glance. I do agree. I think on a desktop, I don't, on your work machine, I don't quite see the attraction. So maybe that's more of a consumer focused thing. We of course also know that part of the goal for Windows 11 is different form factors. So Microsoft announced the Surface Neo, which has kind of been put on hold, which was originally waiting for Windows 10X, which was kind of designed to be a slimmed down mobile rich experience for Windows 10. So we don't quite know, I guess, where Windows 11 on smaller factors will go. Will we ever see it on, things like the Surface Duo and devices like that? I don't know. I'm a bit the same as you. Looks quite nice, but in reality, I find it a bit unfunctional. You can see your mail, but when you click on it, it takes you to the web browser. Well, okay, great. I could just pin the web browser. Kind of agree, I think, on that one. Anything you hate? Go on, James.
At the moment, I'm putting it down to being a bug, right? So I've always used Windows Hello just as like a really quick way to get in. Quite like it. It recognizes me, unlocks, but actually doesn't unlock. So you've been recognized, but then I still have to put in a PIN or a password to get in. That's really annoying at the moment. Do you use Hello?
Yeah, we use Windows Hello. Yeah. So we are actually completely passwordless at Cisilion. So we don't have passwords at all. So everything we do is Windows Hello as the primary authenticate. So if it's a trusted location, it's Windows Hello. If you're in a non-trusted location, it's Windows Hello, and then MFA challenge. And I think that's one of the other things as well. I think that we're going to see. I mean, certainly a lot of the projects that we're starting to get involved in is how do I get rid of passwords? So how do I have single sign-on, I guess, everything, and use some of this technology? And I think it's still, I think the password is still there somewhere in the background, but I do think the sooner we get rid of passwords, the more secure the world will be, right? I've not seen that bug actually. That's an interesting one. On a couple, I've seen some audio issues. I've got one of my Surface devices seems to, if I'm on a Teams call, I manage about 20 minutes, and then it's almost like the audio driver completely crashes, and I get no sound and no one can hear me. I mean, it just kind of comes back, but you don't get any visual notification other than people going like that at you. Any other hates from anybody? I mean, yours sounds more like a bug than a hate. That's good. That's good feedback. I should be listening to this. Let's talk about the Teams integration then, right? So that was a point you raised, Kevin, which was one of the things that they spent quite a lot of time promoting on the announcement for Windows 11. Do we all think that's a good thing, having that native integration into Teams and quick access to chat and calling and stuff? Yeah. I mean, Kevin's a fan. I can see Kevin's a fan. I'll get you a flag.
The easier we make it for people to use, the better. It's as simple as that. And I do think that integration into the OS will actually make it more seamless for our users to sort of consume the information within Teams. I mean, it's been quite a big culture change shifting to Teams for our organisation, because we've only done it now for the last sort of 18 months or so. But the easier we make it, it's got to be good, hasn't it?
Yeah. Anyone think it's not a good idea?
Zoom, I bet they don't think it's a good idea.
Well, that's actually the interesting one. I think, and that's not in the preview yet, because you say they're waiting. I think we're waiting for the new Teams engine to be released before they do that. I've seen snippets of it so the new Edge engine is running on Windows 11 natively, but I've not yet seen anything harnessing it. So it will be interesting to see when that releases. I'm told it's in the next month. It's coming into the preview channels. As to the criticism that will arise, whether there'll be a monopolies claim and all the other things that Microsoft tend to find themselves witness to. I mean, I still can't remove Chrome from my Samsung phone, but if we go back to that battle of when Microsoft had to do it and introduce the browser choice, remember that when it all came out, the big browser choice options. Yeah, I would imagine that if that it will be extensible, right? So I would imagine that if people design to the relevant standards, then you'd be able to extend that interface for other things. It would make absolute sense to have, you know, access to ticketing systems, or access to remote view, or access to, like say, Zoom or WebEx or whatever your poison is for applications to exist. I absolutely expect Microsoft to do it with their own native products first. Absolutely, but there will be lots of organisations out there that don't use Teams yet, that might have a challenge with it. And you're right. I think some of the competition will certainly throw their monopolies cards out there as well. So that'd be an interesting one to see. I guess as we kind of start to wrap up, then, is there anything that, you know, when you think about the user, right? Then one of the biggest challenges that we had with the transition from Windows 7 to 10, and I'm purposely leaving out Windows 8 because not many people did that for the obvious reasons. Although of course Windows 10 is very heavily built on that technology. Do you see there being the same challenge around adoption for users moving to 10 from 10 to 11 from what you've seen today? Or do you think now that the users are relatively just okay with accepting that things change? What's your thoughts? Or is there something else that's going to hit the challenge further? Kev?
I think, as we've said earlier, that the OS itself is from my user base, is a very small aspect of IT use. It's literally a window, excuse the pun, but it's a window to actually get you through to the social service system or the housing system or whatever other system it is. There'll be bigger changes coming along. I think one of the colleagues on the call said it earlier regarding sort of a change to Office is a much bigger challenge than a OS upgrade, because all it means is we have standard desktops. So them standard desktops have standard icons on in standard places. So therefore, it's actually quite a simple transition. So I don't think it would be a big change from an organisational perspective at all. On saying that, I could be completely wrong because we haven't actually seen the final release yet.
Yeah. I think you're right though. I think the Office changes have always been a challenge, right? Always. And of course, you know, as we move, and this probably hits the last point I was gonna make, is around apps in general, right? So one of the things that we talked about, I think we've talked about this on this call before, is, you know, the world of mobile, right? Is your apps update. I probably had 20 or 30 apps update overnight. Some of them end up with a complete new visual UI. Some of them just update in the background. Of course, one of the things that Microsoft have touted with Windows 11 is the use of Android apps, right, within Windows. I just wanted to get your view on how important you see that, both in your personal world and your professional world. Who wants to go? Dave?
Yeah, I think just from my point of view, I've used an Apple M1 Mac, and one of the things touted for that was the fact that you could put iPad apps on it. I thought that was a good idea on the surface, and then you actually practically use it, and there's probably 2 or 3 apps that I actually use. So I think it sounds very good. In practical terms, I think there will be very few use cases that meet the requirements to do. I'm sure there will be some apps that will benefit from being on the desktop, but I think it's a nice to have really, rather than an essential thing these days.
James, what do you think? And do you think it would encourage laziness with developers that would just go, well, I'll just compile it for Amazon, I won't bother making a Windows app?
If I'm honest, it depends on what your ecosystem looks like, if you're fussed about Android apps or not. So we're supporting the London Ambulance Service. We've got 4,000 paramedics out on the road, all with iPads. They could care less if Windows 11 is going to have Android apps natively, I guess. So I think that's going to be your starting point. And I back David's point as well. Portability and usability across the ecosystems will depend on what your use case is and the functionality that, as you then just said, Rob, that the devs want to put in that effort into making it come to life.
Anyone else got a view?
think it's nice to have as a consumer. It'll make sod all difference to me. It's like we run thousands of Android handsets, but you look at it realistically, and the key core services we deploy across those, they're either Rails specific stuff where you kind of go, you've got a desktop version of it as a line of business app with more features and more functionality on an actual bigger screen and bigger device, or you're in the territory of it's linked to the Amazon store, isn't it? Anyway. So, yeah. I mean, good luck getting the availability of apps in the Amazon store versus the Google Play store anyway. But the stuff I'd be sort of pushing to my Android handsets, they're either going to have a web version which has got more features than an Android app on a laptop or desktop, or it's going to be a case of you'll get better functionality out of the stuff we'd have with a native PC app, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm actually waiting for Microsoft to announce that those apps are going to come to Teams phones as well. I wouldn't be surprised if that comes out from somewhere. Great. I think we're just about out of time. We've kind of stormed through this, and it was a bit of a whistle stop today because it is new. I was keen to get people's view. Hopefully, you've all found this useful. It's been good hearing your views and experiences. I think I had a couple of things just to kind of cover, which I think would be my takeaways from today for anyone listening and interested in Windows 11. If you didn't know it existed, you do now. If you want to get going on it, it's only available through the Windows Insider program, so you can enroll on that. If it's your home personal PC, then you can access that in just there's actually a setting called Windows Insider in the settings tools within Windows 10. If it's a commercial machine, then you talk to IT and they can enroll you or some of your devices on the Insider program for business. Bear in mind, it's very rough and ready, so there will be bugs, it will crash. The devices don't use it on your daily machine. I do, it's fine. But that's general advice, so just to throw that one out there. The thing to think about, I think, is start thinking about your devices. So if you've got hardware refreshes coming up, it's worth looking at the Windows 11 eligibility. Most modern devices will be anyway, but it's worth checking, particularly if you buy lower end, like more budget machines. Do check the hardware requirements. The viewpoint is that your apps and policies will work on Windows 11 if they work on Windows 10. Microsoft have got a service called App Assure, which is a service whereby they not only they've got 1.5 billion devices out there now running Windows 10. They see telemetry data for every single application that is running, every single version. They know when an application crashes, so they will be obviously using that telemetry data to provide guidance on what applications will work, what applications, to your point, Kevin, are supported by the vendor as well. So appreciate that there is always going to be a handful of smaller vendors out there that hopefully are watching this going, what, Windows 11? Need to think about that. But that's the general viewpoint, but that's part of the Insider program. And again, the advice really from Microsoft is start looking at modern management on devices. If you've not experimented and played around with some of the deployment tools now available, then do. I had a loan device from I had to give it back, James. I had that Surface Laptop 4 from Microsoft last week. Had to give it back, but I ran that straight through autopilot. So I just set that device straight up from zero, and it was actually really nice to see how they've completely transformed the onboarding experience. Even now in Windows 11, it was something I was expecting to just look like the Windows 10 onboarding process, but it is really, really modern. It actually looks really friendly. It looks like it's been designed for an end user rather than IT. And if you want more information, then talk to your Microsoft representative, talk to your partners. There are Microsoft are great at running these funded workshops where they'll do app assurance discovery workshops. They'll loan you devices. So James, I know you've got a couple of devices coming to have a look at around Surface. They'll also run workshops which your partners can deliver for you, which are funded by Microsoft for things like modern management as well. So they'll fund presentations, they'll fund proof of concepts around Intune modern management, those kind of things. So just a couple of things, and we'll share some tips afterwards and stuff, but just some things that you can start doing if you want to start having a look at Windows 10. And I'm sure any of you got any last passing advice or recommendations for anybody, then they'd love to hear it. There we go. That means I was right. So fantastic. Brilliant. Well, listen, that's all we've got time for. Thank you for everyone that's tuned in to the last 6 months of these. We really appreciate it and appreciate the feedback. We're going to take a break in August, and we'll be back with a new agenda from September. So thank you very much, and for all of you, I'll see you all soon.